Hi everyone, I'm Caroline, and I go to Westmoore. Okay. So my project is called Civic Ideals and Governmental Involvement. So I traveled to Picardy, to Chauny, and my project was basically exploring how one can be a good citizen in the United States versus in France, and what does it mean to young people to be involved in their government and to be a citizen in the United States versus in France. So, first of all, I want to explain this picture because it was super cool. This picture is taken at a town hall meeting, a real one, in my small little town that I lived in France. And in France, it's pretty cool. You don't really live in your big town all the time, of Chauny. French people a lot of times like to live in tiny little towns outside of their big town. So I didn't live in Chauny, I lived in Flavy-le-Martel, which was super adorable. It was a tiny little town, much smaller than my hometown of Moore. And this man was sitting behind my family, and my host mother was a directrice of a collège, she was the principal of a junior high. And so she was also served on a board of directors for the town hall. So she was up at the debate for the town hall because they were going to have local elections. And so she was sitting up at the debate, and we were on the front row going to watch her. And so this man was sitting behind us, and he was very concerned about what was going on in the elections. And he was watching intently, and he asked I had my camera with me, and I snapped this picture, and he asked my host father, "Who is that woman with the camera? Is she a journalist? What's she doing?" So I just thought it was so funny. He was so concerned about who I was. But I thought he really represented what it means to be a good citizen, because here he was, an older gentleman, and he was still involved and still getting out. And I just thought it was really cute. But how can one be a good citizen? Civic ideals in France versus in the United States. So when I conducted my interviews in France, I asked every person that I met, how can you be a good citizen? And as soon as I asked this, I got this response like, oh my goodness, you're asking me this question? It was like I just pointed a loaded gun at their face. I mean, wow. But I always got, the initial answer was, well, you have to vote. But it was really interesting because in each interview, I was told that the voter turnout in France was extremely low. And so if you can be a good citizen by voting, why are the voter turnout so low? I don't really know. But another one was to respect the law, respect others, give your ideas to facilitate informed discussions, which I thought was really interesting. Meet with others and discuss your views, give to charity, refrain from complaining when you don't vote. There you go. Invest in one's own community, know the rules of life, respect oneself, and be politically informed. And as Alex said, I found that a lot of French young people really did strive to be politically informed. That's something that I really care a lot about. And as a whole, the Gay-Lussac, the French high school that we visited, really did make an effort to ensure that its young people were politically informed. Now, I had an interview with a CPE, and he gave me a, I guess you could compare it to like a handbook, and it's called the Délégué Flash. And in it, it actually says, it's written in their handbook that you can provide political information to your students, but it has to be unbiased. You have to provide both sides. And I'll provide some examples of that later in my presentation. But if you could go to the next slide, please. Definitely diversified. Okay, so here it is. Due to regulations in the student handbook, newspapers and other political information may only be presented to the students if there are a variety of viewpoints presented. So if you can look behind this young woman sitting at the computer here, this is in their media center. You can see behind her there are newspapers put up, but and students can actually take these down and read them. And while we were there, it was the crisis in Ukraine was just beginning, but all of these newspapers are from a variety of different sources with a variety of biases, and students actually go in there and they read them, and there are magazines and all different types of sources that they can read with a variety of different biases. And I just thought this was so cool. I know personally at my high school, we have a few sources available to us, but nothing like this. I just thought that was so interesting. Next slide, please. Okay, so governmental clubs. I know one way I personally get involved in my government, and one way I participate in my government is through clubs. So I wanted to know, what type of clubs do they have for government in France? If you could go next. They have the Parlement des Enfants, and the participants are called the junior senators. It began in 2000. In 1999, the president of the National Assembly and the general director of UNESCO united young people from 174 countries and the 5 continents to adopt the Manifesto of Young People of the 21st century from the Parliament of Young People. Another club that they have is the CVL, Conseil d'Enfants et des Jeunes. It was created in 1999. There are delegates at the communal level and also at the regional level. Delegates are elected by their peers at each school. There are 400 communes across France. The students are able to communicate information about all aspects of school life to students and administrators. They suggest improvements and convey the positive changes they've affected. So at our school, I actually met a regional representative. He went to Gay-Lussac, and it was really neat. And I have information about my discussion with him later, and it was pretty cool. He actually represented all of Picardy, which was so cool that he went to Gay-Lussac. And in France, it's really difficult to be involved in a bunch of clubs, which is not the same as in the United States, because the French school day is pretty long. They start early in the morning at, I believe, around 8 o'clock, and they go until 6 o'clock. Now they do have Wednesdays off, but sometimes they have classes on Saturday mornings. So it's really difficult to get involved with clubs outside of school. Now I participate in a lot of clubs at school, so that's why if you do a club in France, you do usually only one club. And so I thought it was really interesting that this young man had risen to such prominence and represented his own region. So I thought it was really interesting. So youth in government. This is a club in the United States that I personally did participate in. I'm a senior. So youth in government. Basically, youth in government is a way for students to interact with their government in their own lives. It's a really hands-on approach. There are 3 branches. The executive branch, which is the youth governor. Each state has a youth governor, and it's through the YMCA. The legislative branch, which is where you can be either in the House, the Senate, or Oklahoma actually is pioneering the freshman house. And then there's also the media branch. And Oklahoma now has the freshman house. No, yes. Oklahoma did have the youth commission, but we have since replaced that with freshman house, yes. But in the media branch, you can either be in the newspaper or the broadcast. And I was in the broadcast and actually led that branch for 2 years. So that was pretty neat. But youth in government is a really great way to interact with your government on a hands-on level. And at the national level, once you go to your state conference, which we have one state conference every year, you can go to the Conference on National Affairs, which is where all the states get together and debate legislation of national importance. So it's a really great way for all of the states to come together. So that's one way that we can get involved in our government in the United States. So the next one is going to be Model United Nations. And that's basically where each student represents a delegate of the Model United Nations, and you represent a country, not yourself. And so that's where I think it's really important for students to learn how to simulate other viewpoints, and which is really difficult to do. I personally know a lot about the Middle East, at least I try to. It's one thing that I'm really passionate about. And so I started out learning about Iran and Iraq, and then I had to represent Nigeria one year, which was so difficult and different for me. And that really taught me a lot about not only my government nationally, but about world government, which was so interesting. So that's one way that students in the United States have the ability to participate in their, not only in their national government, but in the world government and in international politics. So next slide, please. So this is a quote that I got from Madame Charlotte, which she is another CPE at the high school. She said, "Students are afraid of engaging in politics. There's always political unrest." And this was a phrase that I heard so much. This was echoed in almost every single interview that I gave And so I really felt that to be true to my trip to France, I had to put this in my presentation. Everyone that I talked to basically said that there's always political unrest throughout France, and that's one of the main reasons why they feel that students don't interact with their government more. And so I really just felt that that was something that I needed to convey to you when I speak on this. So the availability of programs. Basically, in France, they have this course called civic education. So it starts in junior high, and then it continues through high school. So they have to spend at least 10 hours per year in this course. And their course offerings aren't really exactly the same, like their le rythme scolaire is not exactly the same. Whereas in the United States, usually we go to the same classes every single day. They don't exactly do that. They might have 2 hours of one class a day and then 1 hour of another class. In the United States, we don't really do that. So that's why 10 hours per year it's scheduled like that. The course focuses on things from governmental structure to political and social engagement. When I was there, I went to a civic education class, and they were focusing on famous women in politics throughout the world. So, in fact, one student did Olympe de Gouges, and she had like a kiwi, and she drew a face on it, and had like a little presentation written up, and had to do something on it. So. It was pretty interesting, the way that they did it. So in the US, we don't really have a mandatory course like that, but we do have American Studies or AP Government, which I found is pretty comparable. But I would say that in the United States, we have a more rigorous civic education course that's I think it's more rigorous because we do have history courses that I think touch on the civic education topics because our history courses do focus on that throughout our history years. So next slide. So these are my interviews with students. Margot, she's an 18-year-old art student. She's not involved in any political clubs, but she has strong political views. So you would think, looking at her on paper, you'd say, oh, she's not involved in any political clubs. She doesn't really do anything. She's just an art student. She must not really have strong political views. But she actually, I found, was so opinionated. She was so wonderful to talk to. And her opinions were based on fact. I found she was absolutely delightful. And that's one thing that I think that was really surprising because, you know, you look at Maxime, he's 17 years old. He's the delegate for his sector in Picardie in the CVL, and he also runs track. In the United States, all too often, we look at people on paper and we say, oh, you're in this club, and this club. You have all these qualifications. You must be so qualified. And we qualify people's opinions based on what they do. But we look at Margot and you know, we say, oh, she must be just an art student. And we might throw her opinions away. But I found that by sitting with people and talking with them, I really gained so much. And I really learned that all of these French students they were really so educated because they had this information available to them, and they really searched out information. I found more than the average American student did, which was really very interesting. Next slide, please. So these were two adults that I interviewed. Monsieur Jacquin, they're both CPEs at the school, and the job of a CPE is to administer discipline and direction, and also to, well, Charlotte had an interesting take on her job. She said that she feels that her job is to teach students to respect the law, themselves, and their fellow citizens. She said for her job is not just a job, but a career. And she feels personally responsible for each student's life and to respect the law. And I thought that she was such an interesting woman. But Monsieur Jacquin believes that the principle of laïcité helps to preserve equality in the school system. So he was very in favor of le laïcité. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the classroom differences between France and the United States. I thought the difference between the classroom was also something that was really important. In France, the classroom teachers are traveling teachers a lot of times. And in the United States, a teacher's classroom can oftentimes become like a second home. So on the left is an example of a teacher teaching in a library. So you can see the a newspaper stand, and a teacher helping a student at a library table. And then on the right, you can see an example of a poster displaying President Kennedy and the Texas School Book Depository, an AP government student studying with presidential posters behind her, and then some books on the Constitution with a head of Buddha right next to it. And so, I just thought this was really interesting because in the United States, you get a feel for who the teacher is. You see family photos and a lot of decorations with projects that the students have done and all of these things that make a classroom feel like a home. And then in France, it's like, I would go into a classroom and it's, where are we today? Okay, there's a projector, a chair, and a desk for the teacher. And I don't know, it just felt really different to me. And maybe that's because I'm so used to this, but it was just strange. And I just feel like in the United States, we have a much more personal relationship with our teacher, and I feel like that's how we can sort of get to know the teacher a lot more, and I feel like that really helps us participate in the classes a lot more, and facilitates the teacher, or helps the teacher to facilitate spreading those political ideas. And a lot of times I know teachers that aren't afraid to say, this is my political ideology, this is what I affiliate with, this is my political affiliation. But personally, that doesn't sway me, and I know students that doesn't sway, and whereas in France, they're not allowed to say that. So I think that might be the reason for that difference. But next, please. So I did conduct a survey in France, and I wanted to share those results with you. So my first question was, being a good citizen is important to me. So you can see that both in the left is the French results, and the right is the results from Westmoore. So you can see that they both did find that it was important. That's pretty similar. When I asked if voting was a civic duty, you can see that is incredibly similar as well. This one was really something I really wanted to make a main focus of my project. I ask this every single time. I asked, I feel responsible for my fellow citizen. You can see that, oh, this one's JK. On the left is actually the Oklahoman one, and on the right is the French one. You can see that in Oklahoma, you got a lot of neutrals and no's, and on the right, French students really did feel responsible for their fellow citizen. And I think this might be attributed to the French government, to maybe the socialist aspect of the French government, this aspect of French society. And in all my survey, or in all my, that's it, it's on now. In all my interviews, when I asked the question, do you feel responsible for your fellow citizen? Everyone I asked said, yes, but I don't think it's common to feel responsible for your fellow citizen. I don't think everyone feels like that. So maybe there's this sentiment that not everyone does, but I think there's this common feeling that it's something that's being lost, but it's something ingrained in French society. So that was really interesting. And giving to charity is something that I found is really a common thing that French people feel that they need to do. But what they can, even if it's small, I think they still think it's important. I understand how my government works. I think that Americans feel that they are better prepared a little bit more, but those are a little bit more similar. But yeah, overall, Americans do feel better prepared. And then you can see knowledge of how my government works would be useful for my future. Yeah, Americans were in accordance that they would think that it would be a lot more useful right there. And then the next one. Yeah, both of those, I feel that I participated in the governmental process. Those are switched, I think. So I'm not quite sure why this is, but they both of the surveys say that they don't feel that they have not participated in the governmental process, which I feel like is really interesting, because when I ask them about what they think participating in the governmental process is, a lot of these students are of voting age, and on Instagram and on social media networks like Twitter and Facebook and everything like that, there were all of these pictures and postings of their voting card and everything like that. And so I just thought it was so strange, because they say that they've never participated in the governmental process, yet they're so excited about their voting cards and they're so excited about all these things. And I'm like, what are you doing then? What do you think this is? I don't know. But so this right here was, what do you think your civic ideals are? You know, we're talking about civic ideals, but what do you think that includes? So I feel obligated to volunteer. So French people and American people are pretty in accordance about what they, their level of volunteering, what they think they should do. Paying taxes, you know, just taxes. Overall, French people think they should pay taxes more than American people. But when it comes to military service, French people overall feel that they should serve in the military more than American people, which surprised me personally. I would think it would be the other way, but that was surprising. Local elections aren't as important as national elections. That was pretty interesting. French people said that was true, which this was really interesting because this was at a time when local elections were about to happen, which was kind of strange. And then lastly, I actively seek out information about political events. In the French survey, you can see that overall, they have a more positive trend than the American students, which I thought was something that I found in my time in France. And then the very last one, my political views are similar to those of my parents. The part that says we are about 50-50 was a greater percentage of the French survey, and then very similar was a greater percentage of the American survey. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the very last slide. And I'd just like to thank l'Alliance Française and my French teacher, Madame, and just thank you all for this opportunity, because I had a really great time in France. So.